She carried his child for 9 months. And the moment the baby was born, he erased her existence. Signed a document. Turned his back. Walked out of the hospital room like she was furniture being returned after a lease. But here's the thing about erasure. Sometimes, the thing you delete becomes the only thing you can see. If you've watched until this point, then you already know this wasn't just a story about a contract. It was about what happens when power and emotion collide in silence. Now I want to know from you, was she truly just a surrogate? Or was she the only real thing he ever had, but lost too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading them. If this story stayed with you even a little, leave a like. It helps more cinematic stories like this reach you. And subscribe for more dark romance stories where love and power never end cleanly. They only leave questions behind. The rain in Seoul doesn't fall the way it falls anywhere else. It doesn't pour. It presses. It leans against the glass of high-rise buildings like a living thing trying to get inside. It turns the neon into watercolor and the streets into mirrors, and if you stand still long enough, you can feel it in your teeth. Amara Osei stood inside the lobby of Hanul Fertility Partners, and she could feel it. Not the rain. The weight. The weight of being 27 years old, 6,000 miles from Accra, standing in a country where her skin was a sentence before her mouth ever opened. The weight of the document in her hand, 11 pages, legal Korean translated into English, stamped with a corporate seal she didn't recognize. The weight of what she was about to sell. Not her body. That would have been simpler. There are economies for that, ancient ones, and at least those transactions end when the sun comes up. No. She was about to sell time. 9 months of it. 9 months of her blood, her calcium, her sleep, her ligaments stretching, her organs shifting to make room for a life that would never call her mother. She was about to become a surrogate. And she had exactly $412 left in her account, a student visa 3 weeks from expiration, and a younger brother in Kumasi whose hospital bills arrived like clockwork, the only reliable thing in her life. She sat down in the waiting area. The chairs were leather. The lighting was warm. There was an orchid on the reception desk, white, immaculate, probably replaced every 3 days. Everything about this place was designed to make you forget you were making a transaction. Amara did not forget. The intake coordinator was a woman named Ms. Yoon. Mid-40s. Glasses that probably cost more than Amara's rent. She spoke English with clinical precision, each word placed like a surgical instrument on a tray. You've completed the medical screening. Yes. And the psychological evaluation. Yes. The intended parents have reviewed your profile and selected you specifically. Amara paused. That word. Specifically. Why? Ms. Yoon looked up from her tablet. Excuse me. Why specifically? There must be other candidates. Healthier ones. Korean ones. Something moved behind Ms. Yoon's eyes. Not discomfort. Something closer to a warning. The intended parents have their reasons. Your medical profile is exceptional. Your blood type is compatible. Your genetic screening is clean. That's not what I asked. Ms. Yoon set the tablet down. Miss Osei. The compensation for this arrangement is 280 million won. That is approximately 210,000 US dollars. You will receive premium housing, full medical coverage, a living stipend, and upon successful delivery, the full balance transferred within 72 hours. The number sat in the air between them like a held breath. $210,000. Kofi's surgery. His rehabilitation. The debt to the hospital in Kumasi. Her mother's rent. Her own student loans. All of it. Erased. 9 months. 1 pregnancy. A child she would carry but never keep. The intended father, Amara said slowly. Will I meet him? Ms. Yoon's pause lasted exactly 1 second too long. That won't be necessary. But she did meet him. Not that day. Not in that building. Not in any context that the contract anticipated. She met him 11 days later, at 2 in the morning, in the private kitchen of the residential suite they'd placed her in. A 3-bedroom apartment on the 46th floor of a building in Gangnam that had no name on its exterior, only an address, as though even the architecture wanted to remain anonymous. Amara couldn't sleep. The implantation had been done 5 days prior. Clinical, cold, her feet in stirrups while a doctor she'd never see again inserted a future she couldn't imagine. And since then, her body had felt foreign. Not sick. Not uncomfortable. Just occupied. Like a room where the furniture had been rearranged while she was out. She'd come to the kitchen for water. The lights were off. But someone was already there. She saw his silhouette first. Seated at the island counter, no glass in front of him, no phone, no distraction. Just a man sitting in complete darkness in a kitchen that wasn't his, in a building he apparently owned, at an hour when the world was supposed to be empty. She stopped in the doorway. He didn't move. For 3 full seconds, neither of them breathed. Then, without turning, "You should be sleeping." His voice was low. Not deep in the performative way of men who want to sound powerful, deep in the geological way. Like something that had been compressed over time, pressurized by years of saying less than he meant. "I was thirsty," Amara said. "There's water in the refrigerator on your floor." "I know. I wanted to walk." Another silence. Then he turned. And Amara understood, immediately violently, why Ms. Yoon had said it wouldn't be necessary to meet him. Because meeting him was not a neutral event. His name was Kong Ji-hoon. She would learn this later. Not from him, never from him, but from the internet, from the careful, curated silence that surrounded his identity the way security perimeters surround embassies. Kong Ji-hoon. 33. CEO of Hanul Group, a conglomerate with holdings in construction, shipping, private security, and, if you read between the lines of the financial disclosures, industries that didn't have names in polite conversation. The media called him a businessman. Seoul's underworld called him something else. But standing in that kitchen, Amara knew none of this. She knew only what her body told her, and her body told her this. This man was dangerous the way deep water is dangerous. Not because of what's on the surface. Because of what you can't see below it. He was tall. Over 6 feet, which she registered because she was 5'9" herself and rarely had to look up. His face was angular, symmetrical in a way that felt almost clinical, as if someone had designed it to be looked at but never touched. Dark hair, pushed back. No jewelry. No watch. His clothes were black, not fashion black, not statement black, but absence black. The black of a man who had stopped performing for other people a long time ago. And his eyes. His eyes were the problem. They didn't look at her. They processed her. She could feel herself being categorized, filed, assessed. Not as a woman, not as a person, but as a variable. Something that had entered his equation uninvited. "You're the surrogate," he said. Not a question. Yes. The implantation was successful. They said it's too early to confirm. It will be successful. She blinked. He said it the way someone would say the sun will rise. Not hope. Not optimism. Certainty. As if the universe wouldn't dare to contradict him. "Is there a reason you're in my kitchen at 2 in the morning?" she asked. Something shifted in his jaw. Microscopic. A tightening that most people would miss. But Amara had grown up reading silences. Her father had been a man of long, dangerous quiets. The kind where you learn to read the room or you learn to bleed. She'd become fluent in the language of men who said everything with their muscles and nothing with their mouths. Ji-hoon was speaking volumes. He was surprised. Not that she was there. That she'd spoken to him like that. Directly. Without deference. Without the careful, manicured politeness that he was clearly accustomed to. The verbal bowing that people performed in his presence like a reflex. "This is my building," he said. "This is my kitchen. For 9 months, according to the contract. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Exclusive use of residential amenities." She watched him process this. The corner of his mouth did not move. His eyes did not soften. But something behind them recalibrated. Something fundamental. He stood. He was taller than she'd estimated. The darkness had compressed him. At full height, he occupied space the way weather occupies a landscape. Completely, without apology. "You read the contract," he said. "Every word." Most people don't. Most people aren't selling 9 months of their body. He looked at her for a long time. Not the way men usually looked at her, not the assessment of attraction, not the calculation of availability. This was something else. This was a man encountering something he hadn't accounted for. "Good night, Miss O'Say." He walked past her. Close enough that she caught his scent. Not cologne, something rawer. Cedar. Clean skin. The faintest ghost of cigarette smoke, like he'd quit years ago but his body still remembered. He left the kitchen without looking back. Amara stood in the darkness for a long time. Her hands were shaking. She told herself it was the hormones. The pregnancy was confirmed 6 days later. The blood work came back at 7 a.m. By 7:04, Ms. Yoon had called. By 7:06, Amara's living stipend had been increased, her medical schedule had been updated, and a new clause had been added to her file. Asterisk weekly monitoring. In-home physician. Nutritional oversight. Security detail. Asterisk. Security detail. Is that standard? Amara asked. For this client, Ms. Yoon said carefully, everything is customized. Amara hung up the phone and looked out the window. Seoul stretched below her, chrome and glass, 46 floors of distance between her body and the ground. She put her hand on her stomach. Nothing yet. No bump. No movement. Just a cluster of cells dividing silently in the dark, building something that already had a name, an inheritance, a destiny, everything except a mother. No. It had a mother. It just wasn't allowed to keep her. She didn't see Ji-hoon again for 3 weeks. But she felt him. The apartment changed. Subtly, the way seasons change. Not all at once, but in accumulations. First, the food. The refrigerator began stocking itself with things that weren't Korean. Jollof rice ingredients appeared on the second shelf. Plantains. Shito. Groundnut paste. She opened the pantry one morning and found Milo, the exact brand her mother bought in Accra, the green tin with the athlete on the front. She hadn't told anyone about Milo. She hadn't told anyone about any of it. Then, the temperature. The apartment had been kept at the standard Korean preference. Cool, efficient, almost clinical. One morning she woke up and it was warmer. Not dramatically. Just enough. The exact temperature of comfort for someone who'd grown up without air conditioning in the Gold Coast heat. Then, the books. She came home from her prenatal appointment to find 3 novels on her bedside table. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Ya Jayasai. Aisha Haruna Atta. All in English. All first editions. No note. No explanation. Just the books, placed with a precision that felt almost aggressive in its attentiveness. She didn't ask Ms. Yoon about them. She didn't ask the housekeeper, a silent woman named Mrs. Park who moved through the apartment like a benevolent ghost. She didn't need to ask. She knew. And that knowledge sat inside her like a second heartbeat. Quiet, persistent, and entirely unwelcome. The fiancé appeared in week 8. Amara had almost forgotten about her. The contract mentioned an intended mother, a term so clinical it could have referred to a laboratory instrument. But the intended mother had a name, and a face, and a presence that entered the apartment like a weather system. Shin Yoonji. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced, in a cream Chanel suit and heels that clicked against the apartment's marble floors like a metronome counting down to something. Amara was in the living room, reading. She looked up to find Yoonji standing in the doorway, studying her the way you study a stain on an expensive fabric, with the specific displeasure of someone calculating whether removal or replacement is more efficient. So, Yoonji said, "You're her." Her English was flawless. Private school. Probably European boarding. The accent was almost British, almost American, almost nothing. The accent of extreme wealth, which has no country. "I'm the surrogate," Amara said. "Yes. I know what you are." The what landed exactly where it was aimed. Yoonji walked into the room without invitation. She moved the way certain women move when they've been taught that every room belongs to them. Not with arrogance, but with the serene assumption of ownership. She sat across from Amara, crossed her legs, looked at Amara's stomach, which had just barely begun to curve. I wanted to see you in person, Yoonji said. Before things progress further. Things. The pregnancy. Ah. Amara set her book down. You could have called. I don't call. I arrive. Silence. Yoonji studied her. Not her face, her posture, her hands, the way she sat. Amara recognized the inventory. She'd been inventoried before. You're prettier than I expected, Yoonji said. It was not a compliment. It was a threat assessment. Does that concern you? Amara asked. Yoonji's smile was a masterwork of insincerity. Should it? You're the one who came to look at me. Something flickered behind Yoonji's composure. A crack. Hairline. Immediately sealed. I came to make sure you understand the arrangement, Yoonji said. This is a transaction. You are providing a service. When the service is complete, you will be compensated, and you will leave. There is no relationship here. No connection. No attachment. She said attachment the way someone would say disease. I understand the contract, Amara said. I'm not talking about the contract. Yoonji leaned forward slightly. Just slightly. I'm talking about him. The air in the room changed. He has a tendency, Yoonji continued, to become involved with things that don't belong to him. It's a flaw. One I've spent years managing. I'm telling you this not as a warning, but as a courtesy. She stood. Don't mistake attention for affection. Ji-hoon collects. He doesn't love. She left the way she came. Heels clicking. Perfume lingering. The door closing with the soft, definitive sound of a woman who believed she had won a war that hadn't started yet. Amara sat very still. Her hand found her stomach. She thought about the Milo in the pantry. The books on her nightstand. The temperature of the apartment adjusted to degrees of comfort no one had asked about. He collects. But the thing about collection is this. Sometimes the collector doesn't know he's already been claimed by what he's gathering. Week 10. The morning sickness came like a siege. Not the delicate, cinematic kind. Not the single graceful trip to the bathroom followed by a cool cloth on the forehead. No. This was biological warfare. Her body turning against the invasion it had been paid to accept, rejecting and clinging simultaneously, caught between contract and instinct. She spent 3 days unable to keep anything down. The in-home physician, a quiet man named Dr. Cha who spoke to her in soft, careful English, adjusted her medications, monitored her hydration, left notes for Mrs. Park about electrolyte balance. On the third night, at 1 a.m., Amara was on the bathroom floor. Not crying. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since she was 14, when her father left and she'd decided that tears were a currency she couldn't afford to spend. She was just there. Cheek against the cool tile. Body emptied. Waiting for the next wave. She heard the front door open. Not Mrs. Park. Mrs. Park had a key and a gentle way of entering. Not Dr. Cha, he always called ahead. Footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. The footsteps of someone who didn't need permission to enter any room in any building in this city. They stopped outside the bathroom door. Silence. Then, softly, so softly she almost missed it, a knock. Not a demand. Not a command. A question. Go away, she said. More silence. Then the door opened anyway. Ji-hoon stood in the doorway. He was wearing a dark suit, the jacket removed. The shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. There was something on his face she hadn't seen before. A tension that lived in his jaw, in the cords of his neck, in the way his hands hung at his sides as if they wanted to do something and had been forbidden. He looked at her on the floor. She looked up at him. I said go away. He didn't go away. Instead, he did something that broke every rule she'd built around this arrangement. Every wall. Every careful, clinical distance she'd maintained between surrogate and human being. He sat down. On the bathroom floor. In his $10,000 trousers. On the cold tile. 2 feet away from her. Back against the wall. Legs extended. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He just sat. And for 20 minutes, while her body waged its war, while the nausea came in waves and the fluorescent light hummed its indifferent hymn. Kong Ji-hun, head of the Kong Syndicate, CEO of Hanul Group, a man who made other men disappear with a phone call, sat on a bathroom floor with a woman he'd hired to carry his child. At some point, the nausea subsided. Her breathing steadied. She became aware of his presence the way you become aware of gravity, not as a force you can see, but as the thing that keeps you from floating away. "You don't have to be here," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "Then why are you?" He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know." 3 words. Spoken like a confession. Like a man admitting to a crime he didn't understand, couldn't explain, and wasn't sure he wanted to stop committing. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, he was gone. But there was a blanket over her, and the bathroom light had been dimmed, and there was a glass of water on the floor beside her, with a single ice cube, already melting, which meant he'd placed it there minutes ago and chosen to let her wake to it rather than watch her receive it. Amara drank the water, and for the first time in years, something cracked in her chest. Not a break. Not yet. A fracture line. The kind that doesn't hurt until much later. The kind that, by the time you notice, has already split you open. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was what happened after he left. Ji-hun went downstairs. Not to the lobby. To the parking structure beneath the building, where his driver waited in a black sedan with tinted windows that could stop a bullet. He got in the back seat. He sat in darkness. And he pressed his fist against his mouth so hard his knuckles went white. Because he understood, with the clarity of a man who has built his entire life on the principle of emotional absence, that something had just happened on that bathroom floor. Something he did not authorize. Something he could not control. And Kong Ji-hun did not survive this long, in this world, in this empire, with this much blood on his ledger, by allowing things he could not control. He pulled out his phone. Dialed a number. "Increase the detail on the 46th floor," he said. "I want someone in the hallway at all times." A pause on the other end. "Sir, is there a threat?" Ji-hun looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the car window. "Yes," he said. He hung up. The threat had no name yet, but it lived on the 46th floor, and it had looked at him from a bathroom floor with eyes that didn't beg, didn't plead, didn't ask for rescue. Eyes that simply saw him. And being seen, for a man who had spent his entire life behind glass, that was the most dangerous thing in the world. Week 12. The first scan. Dr. Cha performed it in the apartment, a portable ultrasound unit wheeled in like contraband, because apparently even prenatal care was classified when the father was Kong Ji-hun. Amora lay on her bed. The gel was cold. The screen was angled away from her, a deliberate choice, she'd been told. The intended parents would receive the images first. Standard protocol. Dr. Cha moved the wand across her abdomen. His face remained professional, neutral, the careful blankness of a man who knew exactly who paid his salary. Then he stopped. His hand paused. His eyes narrowed at the screen. And for one terrible suspended moment, Amara felt the floor drop out from under her. "What?" she said. "What's wrong?" Dr. Cha shook his head. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is healthy." But that pause had a shape. A weight. After he left, Amora lay in the dark and put her hands on her stomach. 12 weeks. The size of a plum, the book said. Fingernails forming. Vocal cords developing. A voice being built inside her that she would never hear call her name. She was thinking about this, about unnamed voices and plum-sized futures, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. Silence on the other end. Not dead air. Living silence. The silence of someone holding the phone, breathing, present. "Hello," Amara said. Nothing. Then, so quiet it was barely there. The scan was normal. Ji-hun's voice. Raw. Unprocessed. Different from the controlled baritone she'd heard before. This was the voice underneath, the one that existed at 2 a.m., in dark kitchens, on bathroom floors. "I know," she said. "Dr. Cha told me. He told me too." Silence. "Then why are you calling?" she asked. The longest pause yet. She could hear him breathing. She could hear, distantly, the sound of rain against glass. Wherever he was, the storm had found him too. I don't know. There it was again. That confession. That admission of a malfunction in his operating system, a variable he couldn't solve, an error he couldn't debug. I don't know. From a man who knew everything. You need to stop calling me, she said softly. You need to stop adjusting my thermostat. You need to stop putting books on my nightstand. You need to stop sitting on my bathroom floor. Why? Because it's in the contract. I wrote the contract. And I signed it. No contact beyond medical necessity. No personal involvement. No. I know what it says. Then follow it. Another silence. This one heavier. This one bruised. Good night, Miss Osei. The line went dead. Amara put the phone down. She stared at the ceiling. And she made a decision. The kind you make at midnight, alone, when the truth is the only company you have left. She would not fall. She would carry this child. She would collect the money. She would save her brother. And she would leave this country, this building, this man, with nothing attached. No fractures. No cracks. No damage. She would be what the contract said she was. A vessel. Nothing more. But that night, for the first time in the pregnancy, the baby moved. Not a kick. Not yet. A flutter. A whisper of motion, deep inside, like a secret being passed from one body to another. And Amara's hand found her stomach in the dark. And she knew, with the certainty of a woman who has survived too much to lie to herself. She was already falling. She just hadn't hit the ground yet. But what she didn't know, what wouldn't become clear until much later, was that someone had been watching. Not Ji-hun. Not his security. Yoonji. In a penthouse across the city, Shin Yoonji sat at her vanity, phone in hand, listening to a recording. Asterisk. You need to stop calling me. Asterisk. Asterisk. Why? Asterisk. Asterisk. Because it's in the contract. Asterisk. Asterisk. I wrote the contract. Asterisk. Yoonji set the phone down. She looked at her own reflection. And she smiled. Not warmth. Not amusement. Strategy. Because Shin Yoonji had not survived 12 years in the orbit of Kong Ji-hun by being emotional. She had survived by being architectural. By understanding that men like Ji-hun were not seduced. They were engineered. Every relationship was a structure. Every affection was a load-bearing wall. And if you knew where the walls were, you knew exactly where to place the explosives. The surrogate was a wall she hadn't anticipated. But walls could be demolished. It was simply a matter of timing. What happened next changed everything. And it started not with a sound, but with a silence that lasted 3 days too long. 3 days. 72 hours of nothing. No adjusted thermostat. No books appearing like offerings. No late-night phone calls disguised as informational updates. The apartment returned to its original temperature. Clinical. Efficient, 16 degrees of expensive indifference. Amara told herself this was what she wanted. She told herself every morning while the nausea crawled up her throat and the baby inside her grew another millimeter. She told herself while Mrs. Park served meals in silence and Dr. Cha performed his weekly checks with professional detachment. She told herself while standing at the window, 46 floors above Seoul, watching the city breathe without her. This was what she wanted. Distance. Contract. Transaction. By the 4th day, she stopped telling herself. Because on the 4th day, the flowers arrived. Not from Ji-hun. From Yoonji. White chrysanthemums. In Korea, Amara had learned. Funeral flowers. The flowers you bring to the dead. The card read. Asterisk for your health. CJ asterisk. Amara stood in the kitchen holding the card. And she understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. This wasn't about a baby. This wasn't about a contract. This was a territory war. And she was standing on the disputed land. She threw the flowers in the trash. Mrs. Park watched from the doorway. Said nothing. But that evening, a small pot of yellow chrysanthemums appeared on the kitchen windowsill. the kind that meant life, not death. Mrs. Park never acknowledged them. But Amara understood. In this building, even the housekeeper had chosen a side. Week 14. The anatomy changed. Not just the pregnancy, though that was changing too, her body rounding, her center of gravity shifting, her skin stretching to accommodate a future she was being paid to relinquish. No. The anatomy of the arrangement changed. It started with the driver. She'd been assigned a car and driver, part of the contract, transportation to and from medical appointments. The driver was a man named Seo Min-jun, ex-military, early 40s, built like a wall and approximately as talkative. But on Monday of week 14, Min-jun didn't arrive. A different car came. Black. Longer. The windows so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than block it. Amara hesitated outside the building. The rear door opened from inside. Ji-hun. Not in the driver's seat. Not in the front. In the back, like a man who'd rearranged his entire morning to occupy the same sealed metal container as a woman he'd been ordered. By her, by the contract, by every rational impulse in his empire, to avoid. Get in, he said. Where's Min-jun? Reassigned. By whom? He didn't answer. I can take a taxi, she said. You're carrying a 400 million won investment. You are not taking a taxi. There it was. The reduction. The reframing. Not a child. Not a life growing inside her with fingernails and vocal cords and a heartbeat she could now hear on the monitor. An investment. She got in the car. The door closed. The silence was absolute. Seoul moved past the windows like a film neither of them was watching. The distance between their bodies on the back seat was precisely calculated, close enough to share air, far enough to deny intention. Amara watched the rain. Ji-hun watched Amara. She knew because she could feel it. The weight of his gaze on the side of her face, on her jaw, on the place where her pulse beat against her neck. She could feel him cataloguing her the way he'd done that first night in the kitchen, but differently now. Not assessing a variable. Reading a text in a language he was only beginning to learn. You stopped, she said, still looking at the rain. Stopped what? Everything. The food. The temperature. The books. A beat. You asked me to. Since when do you do what people ask? The car turned. The rain intensified. In the brief illumination of a passing streetlight, she saw his hands, folded in his lap, perfectly still, but the tendons taut. The hands of a man holding himself in place. Since you, he said. 2 words. Spoken without inflection. Without drama. Without the cinematic weight that such a confession might carry in a different story, a different life. He said it the way you'd state a fact. The sky is grey. The roads are wet. Since you. Amara closed her eyes. Don't, she whispered. Don't what? Don't make this into something it can't be. I'm not making it into anything. Then what are you doing in this car? He was quiet for a long time. The hospital came into view through the rain, glass and steel, as cold as the silence between them. I want to see the scan, he said. She opened her eyes. Turned to look at him for the first time since getting in. His face was unreadable. The surface of deep water. Why? She asked. Dr. Cha sends you the results. I don't want the results. I want to see it. It. Not the baby. Not my child. The clinical pronoun, the safe distance. But his eyes told a different story. His eyes said, I want to be in the room. I want to hear the heartbeat. I want to watch your face when you hear it. His eyes said everything his mouth was too fortified to speak. Fine, Amara said. She got out of the car before he could respond. The examination room was white. Not the warm white of the apartment lobby. Medical white. Absence white. The white of a room designed to contain bodies and information and nothing else. Amara lay on the table. The gel. The wand. The screen, this time, angled toward her. Dr. Cha had received new instructions, apparently. From whom, no one said. Ji-hun stood in the corner. Not beside her. Not near the screen. In the corner, arms crossed, back against the wall, occupying the position of maximum distance while remaining in the room. A man who wanted to be present but couldn't bring himself to be close. Dr. Cha began. The wand moved. Static resolved into shapes. Grey, white. The slow, oceanic pulse of an interior world. And then, the heartbeat. Fast. Persistent. A rapid underwater drumming that filled the room like a weather system. Like rain against every surface simultaneously. Amora's breath caught. She'd heard it before. At the 12-week scan. But that had been through Dr. Cha's clinical narration, filtered through medical terminology and professional distance. This was different. This was the sound of a life she had made with her body for a man standing 6 feet away who could not touch her. She looked at the screen. A profile. Tiny. Perfect. The curve of a forehead, the suggestion of a nose, fingers. She could see fingers, 5 of them, curled into a fist the size of a grape. Her vision blurred. Not tears. She didn't cry. She didn't cry. But her vision blurred, and her hand went to her mouth, and the sound that came out of her was not a word. It was the sound of a woman meeting someone she was already losing. She didn't look at Ji-hun. She couldn't. But Dr. Cha did. And what Dr. Cha saw made him look away quickly, because Dr. Cha was a man who understood power, and he knew what it looked like when power came apart at the seams. Ji-hun's arms had dropped. His hands were at his sides. And his face, that carefully constructed architecture of indifference, that mask he wore like body armor, had fractured. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But in the way of frozen lake fractures. Silently, beneath the surface, in patterns you can't see until you fall through. He was looking at the screen. He was looking at his child. And something in him, some load-bearing wall, some structural support that held up the entire edifice of his controlled, calculated existence, shifted. The heartbeat filled the room. Fast. Relentless. Alive. The sound of something that couldn't be unsigned. After the scan, he drove her back. Neither of them spoke for 11 minutes. Then, stopped at a light, rain turning the intersection into a pointillist painting of red and white. "It has your nose," he said. Amora's head turned sharply. What? The profile. On the screen. He was looking straight ahead, jaw set, voice flat. The nose. "It's not mine." She stared at him. "It's 14 weeks old. It doesn't have anyone's nose yet." "It has yours." The light changed. The car moved. And something between them moved too. Something that had been stationary, something heavy and immovable that both of them had been pretending didn't exist. It moved, and neither of them pushed it back. After that, the pretense collapsed. Not the contract. The contract remained intact. Signed, sealed, legally binding, a document that reduced 9 months of human creation to a series of clauses and compensation schedules. But the pretense, the careful fiction that this was merely transactional, that the man who owned the building had no interest in the woman on the 46th floor beyond the biological product she was manufacturing, that collapsed like a condemned structure. It happened in increments. Week 15, he appeared at her door with a bag from a bookstore. Not delivered. Hand-carried. He didn't come in. He held out the bag, she took it. Their fingers touched for exactly 1 second, and the current that passed between them could have powered the building. Inside the bag, a collection of Ghanaian folktales in Twi, her mother's language. "How did you know?" she asked. He was already walking away. Week 16, she woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of music. Faint. Coming from below, not from the building's speakers, but from a floor below hers. A piano. Someone playing a piano at 3 a.m. with the kind of technical precision that takes decades and the kind of emotional recklessness that takes loss. She pressed her ear to the floor. Debussy. Claire de Lune. Played not beautifully. Played desperately. She lay on the floor and listened until it stopped. And when it stopped, the silence that followed was louder than any note. Week 17. He was in the kitchen again. Same darkness. Same stillness. But this time she didn't stop in the doorway. She walked to the refrigerator, poured water, and sat at the island. Across from him. 2 feet of marble between them. You can't keep doing this, she said. Doing what? Being here. It's my building. It's my pregnancy. The word landed between them. My. Possessive. Claiming. His eyes found hers in the dark. Is it? He asked. Not challenging. Not correcting. Asking. Genuinely asking, as if the answer mattered more than the contract, more than the clause, more than the 280 million won. Amara's throat tightened. Biologically, no, she said. Legally, no. According to every document I signed, no. That's not what I asked. I know what you asked. Silence. What do you want from me? She whispered. I'm doing what you paid me to do. I'm growing your child in my body. I'm following every instruction. I'm eating what they tell me. Sleeping when they tell me. Taking what they give me. What more do you want? He was quiet for so long she thought he'd stopped breathing. Then, I want to know your name. She blinked. You know my name. Your real name. The one your mother calls you. Her heart did something involuntary. Something contractually forbidden. Why? Because every file, every document, every report calls you the surrogate. And I. He stopped. Started again. I can't do that anymore. The kitchen was very dark. The rain was very loud. Ma, she said softly. My mother calls me Ma. He repeated it. Once. Under his breath. Not to her. To himself. Like a word he needed to learn how to hold in his mouth. Ma. And the way he said it, the way the syllable moved through his voice, softened by something she'd never heard in him before. She knew. She knew this was no longer a transaction. She knew this was no longer a contract. She knew this was the thing that Yoonji had warned her about, the thing the contract was designed to prevent, the thing that every rational cell in her body screamed at her to stop. And she knew she wasn't going to stop it. Because you can't stop falling when you've already left the ground. Yoonji knew. Not everything. Not the name. Not the kitchen. Not the piano at 3 a.m. But she knew. Because Yoonji had spent 12 years studying Kong Ji-hoon the way seismologists study fault lines. Not for the earthquakes that happen, but for the ones that are building. And the readings were off. He was cancelling dinners. Rescheduling meetings. His phone, which had always been an extension of his body, as inseparable as a limb, was being left in his jacket pocket during hours when the syndicate's operations required constant oversight. He was distracted. Kong Ji-hoon did not get distracted. Kong Ji-hoon had once negotiated a 60 billion won port acquisition while his left hand was being stitched up from a knife wound, without anesthesia, and hadn't lost a single clause. But now he was distracted. And Yoonji knew exactly where his attention had gone. She made 3 phone calls that evening. The first to her father, Shin Dong-hyuk, chairman of the National Assembly's Defense Committee, a man whose political power was rivaled only by his capacity for strategic cruelty. The second to the Kong family attorney, a man who answered to money, not loyalty, and whose loyalty could therefore be redirected. The third to a private investigator who specialized in the kind of personal archaeology that turned people's pasts into weapons. The surrogate, Yoonji said. Everything. Her family. Her finances. Her brother. Everything. She hung up. She stood at her window, looking out at the same city Amara looked out at from 46 floors in another building. The same rain. The same glass. The same gold-lit darkness. But where Amara saw a city she was trying to survive in, Yoonji saw a board. A game. Pieces to be moved and captured and sacrificed. And the surrogate was a piece that had gotten too close to the king. Week 19. The anatomy scan. Amara lay on the hospital bed while the technician mapped every millimeter of the child inside her. Spine. Brain. Heart chambers. 4 of them, each one beating in synchronized rhythm. A tiny percussion section performing its first concert. Ji-hoon was there. Not in the corner this time. Closer. Standing beside the bed. Not touching her. But close enough that she could feel the heat of him, the gravity of him, the way his presence warped the air around her like a planet-bending light. Would you like to know the sex? The technician asked. Amara looked at Ji-hoon. He looked at her. And in that look, that single suspended exchange of gazes over a body that contained the future they were both pretending they could walk away from, something was communicated. Not words. Not decisions. Permission. Yes, Amara said. The technician smiled. A girl. A girl. The word changed the atmosphere of the room the way oxygen changes fire. Ji-hoon didn't move. His expression didn't change. His body remained exactly where it was, 2 feet from Amara, arms at his sides, face a monument to control. But his hand moved. Slowly. Almost imperceptibly. His right hand, which had been at his side, rose, not toward Amara, not toward the screen, and stopped. Midair. Hovering. Over her stomach. Not touching. Suspended. The hand of a man who wanted something so badly that the wanting had become a physical act, a gesture interrupted by every rule he'd ever built. Amara watched his hand. He watched her watching. The space between his palm and her stomach was 2 inches. Maybe 3. The distance of a breath. The distance of a decision. She didn't take his hand. She didn't move his hand. She simply didn't move away. And his hand stayed there, hovering, suspended, trembling with the effort of not completing the gesture, for 7 seconds that lasted longer than any hour of either of their lives. Then he pulled it back, turned, left the room. The door closed softly. Amara lay on the table with her daughter inside her, and the ghost of a hand on her stomach, and the sound of footsteps disappearing down a hallway, and she thought, this is how it happens. Asterisk, not with a crash. Not with a declaration. Asterisk. With a hand that doesn't land. With a door that closes quietly. With the sound of someone walking away from the only thing they've ever wanted to walk toward. Week 21. The breaking started. Not between Amara and Ji-hoon. Between Ji-hoon and everything else. The syndicate meetings ran longer. The calls at midnight became calls at 3 a.m. Men in dark suits appeared in the building's lobby with increasing frequency, speaking in voices too low to carry, carrying folders too thick for routine business. Something was shifting in the power structure. Amara could feel it the way animals feel weather, not through information, but through pressure. Mrs. Park became quieter. Dr. Cha's visits became more frequent, his questions sharper, his eyes more watchful. And Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon began to show the cracks. Not to Amara. Never to Amara. To Amara, he remained what he'd always been. The man in the kitchen, the man in the car, the man whose hand didn't land. But she saw the evidence. The weight loss. Subtle, a man his size didn't lose weight visibly, but there, in the sharpening of his cheekbones, the new geography of his jaw. The exhaustion, carried not in bags under his eyes, but in the microsecond delay of his blinks, as if his body was stealing sleep one flutter at a time. And the knuckles. She saw his hands once in the car, when he thought she wasn't looking. The knuckles of his right hand were split. Healing, but recently opened. Not a fight. The wounds were uniform, evenly spaced. The result of hitting something flat and hard. A wall. A desk. A mirror. She didn't ask. He didn't explain. But that night, in the kitchen, their kitchen, the dark room that had become the only space in the world where neither of them had to be what the contract said they were, she reached across the marble counter and touched his hand. The first time she had touched him. The first time either of them had breached the physical distance that had become their shared religion. Her fingers on his damaged knuckles. Gentle. Clinical, almost. The touch of a woman examining a wound. He went completely still. Not frozen. Still. The way a predator goes still when something unexpected enters its territory. Every muscle locked. Every nerve firing. You're hurting yourself, she said. His voice, when it came, was barely there. Not myself. Then who? Everyone else. She traced the edge of a split knuckle. The skin was rough, scarred from older wounds beneath the new ones. A palimpsest of violence. Is it the business? It's always the business. Is it her? He didn't answer. Ji-hoon. First time she'd used his name. His eyes closed. A man in pain. Not physical pain, the other kind. The kind that lives in the space between what you want and what you've been told you're allowed to have. She wants the child, he said. She doesn't want you. The distinction was clear. Surgical. Yoonji wanted the product, not the producer. And what do you want? Amara asked. His eyes opened. And what she saw in them was not desire, not affection, not the romantic, cinematic longing of a man in love. What she saw was ruin. The look of a man staring at the thing that would destroy his empire, his alliances, his carefully constructed world, and choosing to keep looking. I want. He stopped. His jaw worked. His hand, under hers, turned. Palm up. Her fingers fell into the cup of his palm. His fingers closed around hers. Not holding. Containing. As if her hand was something volatile. Something that could detonate if he gripped too hard or released too soon. I want this to not be what it is, he said. But it is. I know. So what do we do? He looked at their hands. Her brown skin against his pale palm. The contrast was stark. Beautiful. Impossible. We do nothing, he said. We complete the contract. You deliver. You leave. He swallowed. I continue. And the baby. The baby will be raised. Educated. Protected. By whom? He didn't answer. By her. Amara's voice was quiet but edged. By a woman who sends funeral flowers to the mother of your child? His hand tightened around hers. Fractionally. An involuntary confession. You knew about the flowers? Chrysanthemums. White ones. I know what they mean. Something dark moved through his face. Something that wasn't anger. Something beneath anger. Something older and more dangerous. She won't touch the child, he said. I'll make sure. You can't make sure. Not if I'm gone. Not if I'm erased from the equation. She'll be the mother on every document. Every record. And your daughter. Her voice cracked. She sealed it. Your daughter will grow up in a house made of strategy. Not love. Silence. The kitchen was very dark. The rain was very loud. And between them on the cold marble counter, two hands held each other like survivors of a shipwreck. Not out of romance, but out of the desperate, irrational refusal to let go of the only real thing in a world made of contracts and glass. He brought her hand to his mouth. Not a kiss. He pressed her knuckles against his lips and breathed. Just breathed. His eyes closed. His forehead creased. A man in prayer. A man in surrender. And Amara watched him, and she felt the fracture line in her chest. The one from the bathroom floor, the one from the midnight phone call, the one from the hand that didn't land, split wider. She was falling. She had fallen. She was at the bottom now, looking up at the surface, wondering how the light had gotten so far away. Week 23. Yoonji struck. Not directly. Yoonji didn't strike directly. Yoonji struck the way architects demolish buildings. From the foundation. It started with Kofi. Amara's phone rang at 6 a.m. A number from Kumasi. Not her mother. The hospital. Her brother's treatment had been flagged. An anonymous report to the hospital's financial compliance office, questioning the source of the payments. Foreign wire transfers. Large sums. No verifiable employment record for the sender. The hospital was suspending treatment pending investigation. Amara stood in her kitchen, their kitchen, and listened to the administrator explain in careful bureaucratic English that her brother, who had stage 3 lymphoma, who was 22 years old, who called her sister beautiful and believed she was in Seoul studying nursing, that her brother's chemotherapy would be paused. Paused. As if cancer could be paused. She hung up. She stood very still. She did not cry. She called Ms. Yoon. I need to access part of the compensation early, she said. There's a medical emergency with my brother. Ms. Yoon's silence was informative. The contract specifies full payment upon delivery, Ms. Yoon said. No early disbursement. My brother could die. I understand your concern, Miss Osei. But the terms are clear. Then let me speak to him. To whom? To Ji-hoon. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of implication, full of the awareness that first names were not part of this transaction, that Jihun was a word that belonged to family and lovers and no one else. "I'll relay your request," Ms. Yoon said. She hung up. 3 hours later, the hospital in Kumasi called again. Treatment had resumed. The compliance investigation had been closed. All outstanding balances had been paid, not from Amara's escrow account, but from a separate source. Anonymous. Untraceable. Amara sat on her bed and stared at the wall. He had fixed it. Without being asked. Without calling. Without appearing in the kitchen or the car or the scan room. He had simply reached across an ocean and moved a piece on the board that Yoonji had disturbed. And Yoonji would know he'd done it. Yoonji would know because the disturbance had been her move, and the correction had been his, and in the language of their 12-year relationship, a language made of moves and countermoves, strategies and responses, his correction said something Yoonji couldn't ignore. She matters more than the game. The fallout was immediate. Week 24. A dinner. The kind of dinner that exists in the Kong world, not about food, but about architecture. Power seating. Alliance display. A room full of men and women whose wealth was measured not in currency, but in the number of people who feared them. Yoonji sat at Jihun's right, where she always sat, where the contract of their engagement, political, strategic, binding, said she should sit. She wore white. Not bridal white. Possession white. The white of a flag planted on claimed territory. The dinner was at the Kong estate, a structure in Pyeongchang-dong that looked like a museum had mated with a fortress. All glass and stone and the kind of silence that only generational wealth can afford. Jihun sat at the head of the table. Dark suit. Expression of granite. Every inch the man the room expected. The syndicate head, the corporate emperor, the man whose name made other men's voices drop. But under the table, his phone sat on his thigh. And on its screen, a notification. Asterisk Amara Osei, prenatal report, week 24, all vitals normal. Fetal weight, 1.3 pounds asterisk. He read it 3 times. Yoonji was speaking. Something about a political fundraiser. Her father's endorsement of a judicial candidate. The strategic importance of public unity. Jihun heard none of it. He was thinking about a hand on a marble counter. About knuckles against his mouth. About a name, Ma, that he whispered to himself in the dark of his car, his office, his bedroom, like an incantation against the emptiness he'd been living in for 33 years. Jihun. Yoonji's voice. Sharp. The tone she used when she needed to cut through his distance. "Are you listening?" He looked at her. And Yoonji saw it. The thing she'd been afraid of. The thing she'd hired investigators to prevent, sent flowers to threaten, triggered hospital investigations to disrupt. She saw it in his eyes. Absence. He was in the room, at the table, in the suit, in the role. But he was absent. Gone. Relocated to a 46th floor apartment where a woman with his daughter inside her was reading Ghanaian folktales in a language he'd learned to recognize but would never speak. Yoonji's hand found his under the table. Her grip was firm. Not affectionate. Corrective. "We need to discuss the timeline," she said. "The delivery is in 16 weeks. We should finalize the postnatal arrangements." What arrangements? The surrogate's exit. The child's integration. The public narrative. The surrogate's exit. Jihun's jaw tightened. "We'll discuss it later. We'll discuss it now. My father is asking questions. The family council is asking questions. Your mother. My mother is dead. Your mother's legacy is not." The table went quiet. Not because they'd heard. They hadn't. Because the energy shifted. The room felt it. The way rooms always feel it when power moves. Jihun looked at Yoonji. And for the first time in 12 years, Yoonji saw something in his gaze that made her spine go cold. Not anger. Evaluation. The look of a man deciding whether the alliance was still worth the cost. She released his hand. "Later, then," she said. Smile intact. Voice steady. But her hand, under the table, was shaking. Week 26. The child began to kick. Not flutter. Kick. With intention. With force. With the specific determination of a person who was making herself known. Amara felt it at midnight. In bed. Alone. The first real kick. Sharp, sudden, undeniable. She gasped. Her hand flew to her stomach. And the baby kicked again. Against her palm. As if responding. As if saying, asterisk, I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. Asterisk. Amara's eyes filled. She let them. For the first time since this began, she let them. The tears came without sound. Without the dramatic collapse that tears are supposed to accompany. They simply fell, quietly, steadily, down her temples into her hair, while a child she was growing for someone else punched against her hand with all the strength of a 1-pound fist. She reached for her phone. She didn't call him. She texted. 2 words. She kicks. 3 minutes later. A response. Hard. Yes. Good. And then, a minute later, a second message. Does it hurt? Amara stared at the screen. The question wasn't about the kicking. She typed her response. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted again. Finally. Yes. His reply came immediately. As if he'd been waiting. As if he was always waiting. I know. She turned off the phone. She lay in the dark with her daughter's kicks against her palm, and a man's 2 words on a screen, and the sound of rain against the 46th floor window, and she thought, this is what it feels like to hold something you're about to lose. This is what it feels like to love something the contract says doesn't belong to you. This is what it feels like to break. Week 28. The pressure detonated. Yoonji's father arrived in Seoul. Shin Dong-hyuk. Chairman. A man whose political power was measured not in votes, but in the number of careers he'd ended. He arrived at the Kong estate on a Wednesday, with 2 aides and a folder that was thin enough to be personal and thick enough to be lethal. Ji-hoon met him in the study. Alone. The study was all dark wood and leather. Books that no one read. A desk that had witnessed 3 generations of Kong decisions. Mergers, acquisitions, eliminations. Dong-hyuk sat across from Ji-hoon. He didn't smile. Smiling was for men who needed to be liked. My daughter tells me you're distracted, Dong-hyuk said. Your daughter tells you a lot of things. She tells me what I need to hear, which is more than I can say for you, these days. Ji-hoon said nothing. Dong-hyuk opened the folder. Inside. Photographs. Surveillance photographs. Ji-hoon entering the building in Gangnam. The car ride to the hospital. 2 figures in a kitchen window at 3 a.m., silhouetted against warm light. A hand holding another hand across a marble counter. Ji-hoon looked at the photographs. His expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes, something deep, something structural, went very, very still. The surrogate, Dong-hyuk said, is a variable. Variables are managed. Not married. No one is talking about marriage. Not yet. But I know the trajectory. I've seen it before, in men like you, men who mistake proximity for connection. You're spending too much time in that building. Too much attention on a woman whose function ends in 12 weeks. Her function. Her function. Which is to deliver a healthy child and disappear. That was the arrangement. That is the only arrangement. Dong-hyuk closed the folder. My daughter loves you, Ji-hoon. Your daughter loves what I represent. And what's wrong with that? Love is alignment. Strategy. Shared architecture. It's not. He gestured vaguely. Kitchen floors at midnight. Ji-hoon's hands, on his desk, went white-knuckled. What are you telling me to do? I'm telling you to complete the transaction. Deliver the child. Remove the surrogate. Marry my daughter. Consolidate the alliance. And stop acting like a man who has the luxury of feelings. Dong-hyuk stood. You have 12 weeks. Use them wisely. He left. Ji-hoon sat alone in the study. He looked at the photographs. At the kitchen window. At the 2 silhouettes. At the space between them. That precise, agonizing gap that was both the closest he'd ever been to another person and the farthest he could imagine falling. He put the photographs in the drawer. He locked it. And he sat in the dark for a very long time, listening to the sound of a house that had never been a home, surrounded by books that no one read and decisions that no one survived. And he thought about a woman on the 46th floor who called him by his first name and let him press her knuckles to his mouth and carried his daughter like a gift she was being forced to return. And for the first time in his life, Kong Ji-hun was afraid. Not of Dong-hyuk. Not of the syndicate. Not of the political machine that had been grinding toward this marriage since before he was old enough to understand what marriage meant. He was afraid of what he would do when the 12 weeks were over. He was afraid of who he would become if he let her go. And he was afraid, terrified, in the deep, marrow-level way that only men who have never been loved can be terrified, that letting her go was exactly what he was going to do. Because Kong Ji-hun had been built for power. Not for this. Never for this. But the thing about buildings designed only for power, they always collapse from the inside. And the collapse had already begun. He just didn't know it yet. What was coming would be worse than anything he'd imagined. And it would start with a single phone call, at 3 a.m., on a Tuesday. The night the rain stopped. The rain stopped on a Tuesday. Seoul without rain is a different city. Louder. Harder. The surfaces that the rain usually softened, glass, steel, concrete, revealed themselves as what they always were, cold, reflective, unforgiving. At 3 a.m., in the apartment on the 46th floor, Amara was awake. Not because of the baby. The baby was quiet tonight. Settled, heavy, 32 weeks of accumulated life pressing against Amara's bladder, her ribs, her heart. She was awake because the silence was different. The silence that had lived in this apartment for months. The silence of Ji-hun's absence, of Mrs. Park's careful invisibility, of Dr. Cha's professional restraint, had changed shape. It had become anticipatory. The silence before a verdict. The silence of a room holding its breath. Her phone rang. Not Ji-hun. Ms. Yoon. At 3 a.m., Ms. Yoon's voice carried no warmth. But tonight, it carried something else. Something underneath the clinical professionalism. Something that sounded almost like regret. Miss Oh say. There will be a meeting tomorrow at the Hanul Group offices. 10 o'clock. Your attendance is required. A meeting about what? Contract modifications. The words landed on Amara's chest like stones. What modifications? I'm not at liberty to discuss the details. A car will be sent at 9:30. The line went dead. Amara sat in the dark. Her daughter turned inside her, a slow rolling movement, like a whale turning in deep water. The gesture of a child settling in, making herself comfortable. Unaware that the architecture around her was shifting, Amara put both hands on her stomach. It's okay, she whispered. She didn't know who she was talking to. The Hanul Group headquarters occupied a building in Uedo that was designed to make human beings feel irrelevant. 40 stories of black glass and steel, the lobby floored in marble so polished it reflected the ceiling, creating the vertigo of walking between two skies. Amara walked through it at 9:47 a.m. She was dressed in the only professional clothing that still fit her, a black dress that accommodated her stomach without drawing attention to it, which was impossible, because her stomach at 32 weeks drew attention the way gravity draws objects. It simply existed, undeniable. She was escorted to the 38th floor. A conference room. Glass walls, because of course glass walls, because in Ji-hun's world, even privacy was transparent, even intimacy was observable. Inside. Ms. Yoon, seated at the far end of a table long enough to land a small aircraft. A man Amara didn't recognize. Grey suit. Grey hair, grey expression. A lawyer. The kind of lawyer who cost more per hour than most people earned in a month. Yoonji. In a chair near the window. Legs crossed. Face composed. Wearing navy blue. Not white today. Not possession. Authority. And Ji-hun. Standing. Not seated. Standing near the glass wall, his back to the room. Looking out at Seoul as if the city owed him something and he was deciding whether to collect. He didn't turn when Amara entered. She felt the temperature of the room. Not the thermostat, the emotional temperature. It was below zero. Please sit down, Ms. Yoon said. Amara sat. The lawyer opened a folder. Miss Osei, thank you for attending. This meeting concerns a proposed modification to your surrogacy agreement, specifically regarding the terms of post-delivery arrangements. Post-delivery. The part she didn't let herself think about. The after. The empty. Go on, Amara said. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. The gesture of a man who delivered bad news so many times that the delivery itself had become a formality. The intended parents have determined that, in the interest of the child's welfare and familial stability, the post-delivery transition will be accelerated. Rather than the originally agreed-upon 72-hour window following delivery, the proposed modification stipulates immediate transfer. Immediate, Amara repeated. Upon delivery. Within 1 hour. The child will be transferred to the care of the intended parents, and the surrogate will, he paused. The pause of a man choosing between clinical and human language. Commence the exit process. The exit process. Relocation. Your return to Ghana will be facilitated within 48 hours of delivery, with full compensation transferred upon departure. The room was very still. Amara looked at the document the lawyer pushed across the table. Dense text. Legal Korean on the left, English translation on the right. Clauses and subclauses and addendums that reduced 9 months of her body, her blood, her restructured organs, and her restructured heart to a logistics timeline. She looked at Yoonji. Yoonji looked back. No smile. No malice. Something worse. Satisfaction. The deep, architectural satisfaction of a woman who had designed this moment the way an engineer designs a demolition. Precisely, structurally, accounting for every load-bearing wall. 1 hour, Amara said. After delivery. After 9 months. You're giving me 1 hour. The original contract allows for modification with mutual consent, the lawyer said. Your signature on this document would constitute consent. And if I don't sign? The lawyer's pause was informative. The original contract includes a clause regarding non-compliance. Failure to agree to reasonable modifications may result in forfeiture of a portion of the compensation, as determined by arbitration. Forfeiture. Kofi. The hospital. Her mother's rent. The debt. She looked at Ji-hoon. He was still standing at the glass wall. Still facing the city. His back was a monolith. Dark suit, dark posture, the rigid architecture of a man who was holding himself upright through sheer structural engineering. Ji-hoon. She said his name. In this room. In front of the lawyer, Ms. Yoon, Yoonji. She said his name the way she said it in the kitchen, at midnight, over marble. With familiarity. With claim. Yoonji's composure cracked. A fissure. Sealed in a millisecond, but Amara saw it. Ji-hoon turned. And Amara saw everything. His face was the face of a man who had already decided. Not now, before. Days ago. Weeks ago. In the study with Dong-hyuk and the photographs and the folder. He had decided, and the decision had been consuming him from the inside, eating through the walls and the floors and the carefully maintained infrastructure of who he pretended to be. His eyes were empty. Not cold. Not angry. Not the calculated indifference she'd seen on the first night. Empty. The emptiness of a man who had removed something essential from himself in order to function. The emptiness of a building after the furniture has been taken and only the rooms remain. Sign the document, Miss Osei, he said. Miss Osei. Not Ma. Not you with the kitchen darkness around them and the rain as their only witness. Miss Osei. The formal distance. The contractual designation. The reduction. He'd put her back in the file. Back in the clause. Back behind the glass. Is this what you want? She asked. Her voice was steady. Controlled. The discipline of a woman who had learned, at 14, that tears were a currency she couldn't afford. This is what's necessary, he said. That's not what I asked. It's the only answer I have. She looked at him for a long time. She looked at the man who had sat on her bathroom floor, who had played Debussy at 3 a.m., who had pressed her knuckles to his mouth like a prayer. who had hovered his hand over her stomach, 2 inches from his daughter, trembling with the effort of wanting. She looked at him, and she saw him choose. Not her. Not the baby. The empire. The alliance. The glass and steel and power that had been built on the understanding that Kong men did not love. They acquired. They did not feel. They managed. They did not break. They restructured. She picked up the pen. Amara, he started. Her name. Her real name. In his mouth. The one she hadn't given him. But it was too late. She signed. She put the pen down. She looked at Yoonji. Yoonji looked back. And in that exchange, between 2 women, across a conference table, over a document that erased one of them, something passed. Not hatred. Not anger. Recognition. Yoonji recognized what she was looking at. A woman who would not beg. A woman who would not break. A woman who would sign the document and stand up and walk out with her spine straight and her dignity intact and her heart in ruins, and never, not once, let anyone in this room see the devastation. Yoonji recognized it because she feared it. Because dignity, in a woman being destroyed, is the most dangerous thing in the world. Amara stood. She looked at Ji-hoon one last time. When she's old enough, Amara said, tell her that the woman who carried her wanted to stay. She walked out. The glass door closed behind her. The silence she left in that room was not empty. It was the silence of detonation. The silence after the blast, when the smoke hasn't cleared and no one knows yet what's still standing. Ji-hoon stood at the glass wall. He did not move. He did not breathe. And if anyone had been close enough to see, which no one was, because Kong Ji-hoon had engineered his life to ensure that no one was ever close enough, they would have seen a single crack in the architecture. His hand at his side was shaking. 8 weeks later, she delivered. The hospital room was private. Top floor. Security at the door. The kind of room where powerful people's children enter the world. Sterile, monitored, sealed from the noise and mess of ordinary birth. Amara labored for 14 hours. Alone. Not medically alone. Dr. Cha was there, and nurses, and the obstetric team that the Kong family employed. But alone. No one holding her hand. No one whispering encouragement. No voice in the dark saying I'm here. She gripped the bed rails. She breathed through contractions that came like tides. She pushed when they told her to push and rested when they told her to rest, and the whole time, through every contraction, every surge, every moment of her body splitting open to make room for a life she was about to surrender, she kept her eyes open. She refused to close them. She wanted to see. At 3:47 a.m., because of course it was 3 a.m., because everything between them had always happened at 3 a.m., in the dark, when the world was supposed to be empty, the baby came. The sound. Not a cry. Not at first. First. Silence. A held breath pause, the world suspended between not yet and here. Then, a cry. Small. Furious. The outraged protest of a person who had been warm and held and enclosed and was now out, exposed, in a room full of light and strangers and cold air. It's a girl, someone said. Amara already knew. They put the baby on her chest. Standard procedure. Skin to skin. Even the contract couldn't override medical protocol for those first 60 seconds. The baby was warm, wet, impossibly small. Her skin was the color of honey. The exact, specific brown that happened when Amara's deep brown and Ji-hoon's light gold combined, a shade that didn't have a name because it was too new, too singular, too much the product of 2 people who should never have existed in the same equation. Her eyes were closed, tiny fists clenched, mouth working against Amara's skin, searching for something instinctive, something that no contract could prohibit and no clause could regulate. Amara held her. Not with her hands. With everything. Every cell. Every molecule. Every month of nausea and kicks and 3 a.m. conversations and a hand that didn't land. She held her daughter for 47 seconds. Then the nurse came. Miss Osei. It's time. Amara looked up. The nurse's face was professional. Kind, in the way that kindness functions in institutional settings. Present but bounded. Behind the nurse in the doorway stood a woman Amara didn't recognize. Gray suit. Clipboard. The administrative machinery of the Kong family, here to execute the transfer. Amara looked down at her daughter. The baby's hand had found Amara's finger, wrapped around it. The grip of a newborn, reflexive, involuntary, and stronger than any contract ever written. Miss So say. Amara kissed her daughter's forehead. One kiss. Soft. The pressure of a whisper. She whispered something. In Chui. Words that no one else in the room understood. Words from her mother's language, her grandmother's language. Words that had been spoken over newborns in the Gold Coast for centuries before this hospital existed, before this city existed, before this impossible arrangement had been conceived in a glass tower by a man who didn't know how to love. A blessing. A name. A promise. She handed the baby to the nurse. The transfer took 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Amara felt something leave her body that wasn't physical. Not the baby. The baby was already in the nurse's arms. Something else. Something that lived in the space between mother and surrogate, in the gap between who she was and what the contract said she was. It left her, and what remained was a woman on a hospital bed, empty-armed, with milk already coming into her breasts for a child she would not feed. The nurse carried the baby to the door. The woman with the clipboard followed. The door closed. The room was very white. Amara lay still. She did not cry. She stared at the ceiling, and she breathed, and she counted the tiles. 1, 2, 3, 4, because counting was the only thing that kept the sound inside her from escaping. The sound that lived at the bottom of her lungs, in the basement of her body. The sound of a woman being hollowed out while the lights were on and the machines beeped and the world continued as if nothing had been taken. She counted to 47. 1 for every second she'd held her. Then she stopped counting. And the sound stayed inside, where it would live for a very, very long time. She was discharged 26 hours later. Ms. Yoon handled the paperwork. Efficient. Professional. The same clinical precision as the first day, 9 months ago, in the lobby with the orchid. The full compensation has been transferred, Ms. Yoon said, not looking up from her tablet. 280 million won. Your flight to Accra departs tomorrow at 7:15 a.m. Ground transportation will be arranged. Amara stood in the hospital lobby, discharge bag in one hand, phone in the other. She was wearing the same black dress she'd worn to the meeting in the conference room. It fit differently now. Her body had changed, not just the obvious, the stomach still swollen and strange, but everything. Her hips, her shoulders, the way she stood. She was shaped by absence now. The silhouette of a woman with a hole where something used to be. Miss So say. Amara looked at Ms. Yoon. Is there anything else you need? 1,000 answers. None of them speakable. No, Amara said. She walked out of the hospital into the Seoul afternoon. No rain. The sky was clear. Hard. Blue in the way that skies are blue when they refuse to participate in your grief. The car was waiting. She got in. She did not look back at the hospital. She did not look for him in the lobby, the parking structure, the dark sedan with tinted windows. She did not look, because looking was a form of asking, and Amara Osei had stopped asking for things the day she signed a document that erased her. She didn't go to Accra. The flight departed at 7:15 a.m. from Incheon. Amara's bag was on it. Her seat was empty. She took the money, all of it, every one, and she disappeared. Not dramatically. Not cinematically. She disappeared the way people actually disappear. By becoming invisible. By moving to a part of the city where no one looked. By renting a room in a building with no name, in a neighborhood in Anson where the foreign workers lived, where the languages on the street signs were Filipino and Vietnamese and Uzbek and sometimes, if you listened, Chui. She found a midwife. A Nigerian woman named Chidinma who asked no questions and charged in cash and understood, without being told, that some women's bodies needed healing that medicine couldn't provide. The milk came for 3 days before it stopped. Amara bound her breasts and let the pain do what pain does. Remind her that she was still alive. She sent money to Kumosi. Kofi's treatment. Her mother's rent. The debts. All of it, cleared. She told her mother she was fine. She told Kofi she was fine. She told no one the truth. The truth was this: she was not fine. She was not okay. She was not recovering or healing or moving on. She was surviving. Which is different. Survival is the thing that happens when everything else has been taken and the body refuses to follow. Amara survived. She survived the first night alone, when her arms ached with the phantom weight of a baby she'd held for 47 seconds. She survived the first week, when the hormones crashed and her body grieved in chemical language, flooding her with signals meant for bonding and attachment and continuation, all of them unanswered. She survived the first month, when the silence of her room was so complete that she started talking to herself, then stopped, because her own voice sounded like a stranger's. And she survived the second month, and the third, and the fourth, and the seasons changed, and Seoul kept moving, and somewhere in a glass tower in Gangnam, a baby with honey-colored skin was being raised by a woman who sent funeral flowers and a man who played Debussy at 3 a.m. And Amara survived. 14 months. That's how long it took. 14 months of invisibility. 14 months of cash work, tutoring English, translating documents, cleaning offices in buildings that could have been Hanul Group but weren't. 14 months of becoming someone new. Not someone better. Someone harder. Someone who had been through the fire and come out not purified but forged. Different material. Stronger. Less flexible. Less warm. She got a job at a translation firm. Her English. Her Chui. Her French. Leftover from school in Accra. Her Korean, which she'd learned by necessity and refined by immersion. She was good. Better than good. She was the kind of employee who made her superiors nervous because competence, in a woman who had nothing left to lose, looks a lot like threat. By month 10, she was managing her own client accounts. By month 12, she was being recruited by a larger firm. By month 14, she had her own apartment. Small, in Mapogu, nothing like the 46th floor, but hers. Paid for with her money. Earned, not contracted. She was 29 years old. She was alone. And she was, for the first time in her life, untouchable. Not invulnerable. Untouchable. There's a difference. Invulnerable means nothing can hurt you. Untouchable means everything can hurt you and you've simply decided to stand beyond the reach of hands. She stood beyond the reach of hands. She stood there and she breathed and she worked and she lived and she did not think about a man in a dark kitchen, or a hand that didn't land, or a baby with honey skin and clenched fists. She did not think about it. Except at 3 a.m. when the silence was shaped like a body on a bathroom floor. When the absence weighed exactly what a newborn weighs. When her arms ached with the specific phantom pain of holding something for 47 seconds and then letting go for 14 months. At 3 a.m., she thought about it. And then the sun came up, and she stopped. And this was her life. Until the afternoon she walked into her firm's conference room for a client meeting and found Kong Ji-hoon sitting at the table. He looked different. Not aged. Changed. The way landscapes change after a disaster. The topography recognizable, the features familiar, but the composition fundamentally altered. He was thinner. The suit, black, always black, hung differently on his frame. Not loose. But no longer filled with the same dense, gravitational mass. As if something had been subtracted from inside him. His hair was longer. Pushed back, the way it had always been, but less controlled. A strand fell across his forehead, and he hadn't pushed it away, which told Amara more than any sentence could have. This was a man who had stopped managing his appearance. Who had stopped caring what the surface communicated. And his eyes. His eyes were the same. Dark. Deep. The eyes that had processed her the first night, catalogued her, filed her, and then, over months, over kitchens and car rides and ultrasound rooms, learned to see her. They were seeing her now. He stood when she entered. Not quickly. Slowly. The way a man stands when his body has forgotten how to move automatically and every action requires conscious instruction. As if standing, for him, was now a decision rather than a reflex. The conference room had other people in it. Her colleague. His assistant. The paraphernalia of a legitimate business meeting. Folders, laptops, water glasses. None of it mattered. The air between them was 15 months old and still burning. Miss Osei, her colleague said, oblivious. This is Mr. Kong, from Hanul Group. They're looking for translation services for their Southeast Asian expansion. Amara looked at Ji-hun. He looked at Amara. And she knew, instantly, cellularly, the way you know weather or danger or the presence of someone you've tried to forget, that this was not about translation services. He had found her. He had been looking for her. For how long? Weeks. Months. Since the flight she didn't board? Since the empty seat on the 7:15 to Accra? He had been looking for her, and he had found her, and he had engineered this meeting the way he engineered everything. With precision, with resources, with a methodical, obsessive thoroughness of a man who had lost something and would dismantle the world to get it back. Mr. Kong, Amara said. Professionally. Perfectly. Not a ripple on the surface. Underneath. A tsunami. Miss Osei. His voice. The same. The geological depth. The compression of years. Thank you for taking the meeting. Of course. Shall we begin? They sat. They discussed translation services. For 45 minutes, in a glass conference room, Amara Osei and Kong Ji-hun talked about document localization and linguistic calibration and market entry communication strategies, and not once, not a single time, did either of them acknowledge that 14 months ago, she had carried his child and he had erased her and she had signed a document and walked out and disappeared and remade herself from the ruins. Not once. But every sentence had a subtext. Every word was a room with a false floor. Every silence between clauses was loud enough to shatter the glass walls. When the meeting ended, the others left first. Professional handshakes. Business cards. The ritualized departure of people who believed they'd witnessed a routine client consultation. Then they were alone. The glass conference room. The transparent walls. The visible, observable, surveillable space where anything that happened would be seen by anyone walking past. Ji-hun didn't move. Amara gathered her papers. You didn't go to Accra, he said. No. You've been here. In Seoul. For 14 months. Yes. Why? She stopped gathering papers. Looked at him. Why are you here, Ji-hun? His name. In her mouth. After 14 months. She watched it hit him, watched the impact travel through his body like a shockwave, rearranging his posture, his breath, the micro-movements of his face. I needed to find you. You found me. And, he stopped. The same faltering she'd heard in the kitchen. The same malfunction. The error in the operating system. The variable he couldn't solve. The baby, she said. Is she? She's fine. Healthy. Growing. Is she? Amara's composure flickered. 1 second. She sealed it. Is she happy? Ji-hun's face did something she'd never seen. It collapsed. Not dramatically. The way a building collapses when the foundation gives. Structurally, completely, from the bottom up. No, he said. The word hung. She doesn't sleep, he continued. His voice was stripped. No performance. No control. Raw material. She doesn't, she cries. At night. Every night. The nannies. The specialists. Yoonji. He stopped on the name. No one can comfort her. Amara's hands gripped the edge of the table. And you? She asked. Can you? He looked at his hands. Sometimes. If I hold her. If I. He swallowed. She has your nose. The room tilted. Not physically. Emotionally. The axis of the world, the careful, recalibrated axis that Amara had spent 14 months constructing. The axis that allowed her to function, to work, to breathe, to exist without a daughter, shifted. You can't do this, she said. I know. You can't come here and tell me she has my nose and expect. I don't expect anything. Then why? He stood. Took 1 step toward her. Stopped. The distance of a conference table corner between them. Yoonji left, he said. 3 months after the delivery. The marriage arrangement is dissolved. Her father withdrew the alliance. Amara stared. Why? Because I couldn't. He closed his eyes. Opened them. Because I called the baby Ma. The room went silent. Absolutely, structurally silent. He had named the baby Ma. The name Amara had whispered to herself in the dark. The name she'd spoken in Chui in the delivery room. The blessing, the promise, the word from her mother's language that she'd pressed into her daughter's forehead with a kiss. He had heard. He had been there. Outside the room. In the hallway. Listening through the door he wasn't allowed to open. Hearing the sounds of a birth he couldn't attend. Catching a word, one word, in a language he couldn't speak. And he had kept it. And he had given it to his daughter. And it had cost him everything. You named her Ma, Amara whispered. I couldn't name her anything else. You let me go. I know. You signed the document. I know. You stood at that window and told me to sign, and you called me Miss Osei, and you. I know. His voice broke on the second word. A hairline fracture, there and gone, but she heard it. The sound of a man's voice breaking is unmistakable, because it sounds like infrastructure failing. I know what I did, he said. I know who I was. I know I chose the empire over. He couldn't finish. He looked at the floor. At the ceiling. At anywhere that wasn't her face. Over me, she said. Over you. Silence. And now? She asked. He looked at her. And his eyes were not empty anymore. They were full. Devastatingly, unbearably full. Full of 14 months of 3 a.m. silence, of a baby with honey skin who wouldn't sleep, of a name whispered through a door, of a hand that finally had nothing left to hold. Now I'm standing in a conference room, he said, asking a woman I destroyed whether she'll let me try to be the man I should have been. Amara looked at him. She looked at the man who had sat on her bathroom floor, who had put Milo in her pantry, who had played Debussy at 3 a.m., who had pressed her knuckles to his mouth, who had hovered his hand over their daughter, 2 inches from her body, trembling, who had stood at a glass wall and told her to sign, who had erased her, who had named their daughter with the word she'd whispered. She looked at him, and she saw all of it, every version, every kitchen, every silence, every betrayal, every 3 a.m. And she said, no. Not cruelly. Not with anger. Not with the retaliatory pleasure of a woman who has been given the weapon of refusal. Quietly. With the devastating calm of a woman who has rebuilt herself from the ruins and understands, with absolute clarity, that the man who destroyed the first version of her cannot be trusted with the second. No, she said. You don't get to try. Not now. Not because you've lost everything else and I'm what's left. Not because the baby won't sleep and the fiancé is gone and the empire is emptier than you thought it would be. She picked up her papers. You want to see me? Make an appointment. Through my firm. During business hours. She walked toward the door. You want to show me our daughter? File a request. Through a family attorney. With documentation. She reached the door. You want to be the man you should have been? She stopped. Didn't turn. Spoke to the glass. Then be that man for her. Not for me. I'm done being the reason you become better. I'm not your redemption. She opened the door. Amara. His voice. Broken. The voice from underneath. She paused. 1 second. 2. She did not turn around. My name, she said, is Miss Osei. She walked out. She made it to the elevator. Inside, alone, the doors closing, the descent beginning. 40 floors between her and the lobby, 40 floors of free fall. Her knees buckled. She caught herself against the wall. Her hand went to her mouth. And the sound, the one she'd kept inside since the hospital, since the 47 seconds, since the white ceiling and the counted tiles, came out. Not a sob. Something beneath sobbing. Something geological. The sound of a woman who has been holding the weight of an entire collapsed building inside her chest for 14 months and has just, for one unguarded moment, in a sealed metal box between floors, let it shift. The elevator descended. The sound lasted 11 floors. By the time the doors opened in the lobby, her face was dry. Her posture was straight. Her eyes were clear. She walked out of the building. She did not look back. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at her apartment. No return address. No note. Inside, A photograph. A baby girl. 14 months old. Honey skin. Dark eyes. Sitting on a blanket that Amara recognized. Gold and black. Kent cloth. The pattern from her mother's village. The baby was looking at the camera. Not smiling. Looking. With eyes that were Jihun's eyes. Deep, dark, processing. Set in a face that was Amara's face. The nose. The mouth. The exact curvature of the jaw. On the back of the photograph. In handwriting that was precise and controlled and shaking. She sleeps now. She sleeps when I call her Ma. J. Amara held the photograph. She held it in the apartment in Mapogu, in the evening light, in the silence that was no longer the silence of absence but the silence of something accumulating. Something building. Something that had no name yet because naming it would mean acknowledging that the story wasn't over. She put the photograph on her nightstand. Not in a drawer. Not face down. On the nightstand. Where she would see it. Every morning. Every night. Where it would be the last thing she saw before sleep and the first thing she saw when she woke. She did not call him. She did not respond. She lay in the dark and looked at her daughter's face and she felt the fracture line. The original one, from the bathroom floor, from the midnight phone call, from the hand that didn't land, and she realized it had never healed. It had simply been waiting. Waiting for this photograph. This face. This evidence of a life she had made and lost and could not stop loving. The fracture was still there. And it would always be there. And some fractures, she understood now, are not wounds. They are doors. Doors you choose to open. Or not. Outside her window, Seoul was dark. No rain. But somewhere in a building across the city, glass and steel, 46 floors, no name on the exterior, a man sat in a kitchen at 3 a.m., holding a baby who was finally sleeping. The baby's hand was wrapped around his finger. The grip was reflexive. Involuntary. Stronger than any contract ever written. He looked down at his daughter. She had her mother's nose. And the distance between them, between the man in the kitchen and the woman in Mapogu, between the photograph on the nightstand and the child in his arms, between regret and redemption, between what was broken and what might, someday, if the door opened, if the fracture was enough. The distance was exactly the length of a city. And it was exactly the width of a silence. And it was exactly the weight of a name whispered through a door. Ma. The rain began again. Against the glass. Against all the glass in Seoul. And neither of them slept.